February 1943. The desolate, rugged terrain of central Tunisia, with its arid plains and jagged mountains, became the proving ground for a new and ambitious military power, the United States Army. Fresh from the homeland, brimming with industrial might, the United States Army was about to collide with the seasoned, battle-hardened veterans of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's formidable Afrika Korps. The encounter at Kasserine Pass was far more than a mere engagement. It was a devastating baptism by fire, a brutal lesson etched in the blood and sand of the North African desert. For the United States, the true, grinding reality of World War II had finally begun, marking a pivotal moment in their military experience. How did the world's rising industrial powerhouse with vast resources suffer such a profound, costly, and humiliating setback against a numerically inferior, though experienced, enemy? What critical deficiencies in command, training, and doctrine were so starkly and painfully exposed in those harrowing days at Kasserine Pass? How did this unforgiving crucible of defeat ultimately forge the determined, professional, and highly effective fighting force that would eventually sweep across Europe and contribute decisively to Allied victory? This is the compelling and transformative story of Kasserine Pass, a battle that forever changed the U.S. Army. The strategic stage for this confrontation was meticulously set in November 1942 with Operation Torch, the massive Anglo-American landings in French North Africa. The ambitious and audacious goal was to establish a vital second front against the Axis powers. This aimed to relieve immense pressure on the British Eighth Army, locked in fierce combat with Rommel's forces in Egypt. As the British Eighth Army, under General Bernard Montgomery, pushed westward from El Alamein, the newly landed Western Allied forces in Tunisia aimed to execute a pincer movement, ultimately trapping the Axis armies. However, the initial optimistic race to Tunis by the Green Allied forces, particularly elements of the American Second Corps, quickly stalled. German and Italian reinforcements, skillfully rushed across the Mediterranean, swiftly established a formidable Tunisian bridgehead. They clung tenaciously to mountainous terrain and vital coastal areas. This created a perilous and deeply entrenched salient, forcing the advancing Allied forces to confront a well-prepared, determined, and highly experienced enemy in unforgiving territory. The American forces, under the overall command of Major General Lloyd Fredendall, were primarily positioned in the central sector of Tunisia, preparing for confrontation. Their crucial mission was to defend the numerous mountain passes that pierced the dorsal mountains, strategic points vital for controlling movement. These passes, including Fredendall Pass, Sidi Bou Zid, and Kasserine Pass, were vital strategic arteries. They controlled essential access between the low-lying coastal plains and the interior high plateau. Their possession was absolutely critical for both offensive and defensive operations, determining who held the strategic advantage. On the Axis side, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, found himself in an increasingly precarious operational dilemma in Tunisia. His Afrika Korps was caught in a tightening vice. It was squeezed between Montgomery's relentless Eighth Army from the east and the newly arrived Western Allies from the west. Recognizing the vulnerability of inexperienced American units, Rommel, ever the opportunist, devised a daring and audacious plan. Operation Frühlingswind, or Spring Breeze. Rommel's strategic vision for Spring Breeze was bold and incisive, to launch a powerful and concentrated offensive through the central Tunisian passes. His multifaceted objective was clear: shatter American lines, disrupt critical Allied supply depots behind the front, and potentially turn north to crush advancing Allied armies. Such a maneuver, he believed, could significantly stabilize the rapidly deteriorating Axis position in Tunisia, and perhaps even inflict a decisive knockout blow. He held a deep and initially accurate assessment of the tactical ineptitude of the new American army, which he intended to exploit fully. Opposing Rommel's veteran forces was the U.S. Second Corps, commanded by Major General Lloyd Fredendall, a figure whose leadership would prove contentious. Fredendall's leadership style, tragically, would become a significant and enduring point of contention, serving as a textbook case study in failed command. He notoriously established his headquarters an astonishing 70 miles behind the active front lines, deep within a reinforced concrete bunker carved into a ravine. This remote, almost detached command post earned him the derisive nickname, the Magnificent Dugout King, among his frustrated subordinates and British allies. His command ethos was characterized by crippling micromanagement, a profound lack of trust in subordinates, and a fatal tendency to disperse limited forces into small, uncoordinated detachments across a vast front. This fragmentation, a contradiction of sound military doctrine advocating concentration of force, gravely weakened his corps and tragically played directly into Rommel's brilliant hands. Overseeing the complex North African campaign from his headquarters in Algiers was the Supreme Allied Commander, Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was acutely aware of the immense challenges confronting his forces, particularly the pervasive lack of combat experience among American troops and their senior leadership. He knew a major test was coming, but perhaps not the catastrophic scale of the disaster that ultimately awaited his forces. The Axis offensive, Operation Frühlingswind, erupted with brutal force on February 14, 1943, marking the beginning of the Kasserine Pass battle. Elements of the German 10th Panzer Division, spearheaded by formidable Panzer IV Ausf. G and pioneering Tiger I heavy tanks, struck with devastating precision at Fredendall Pass. Simultaneously, the veteran 21st Panzer Division launched a furious assault against WWII, pressing hard against American positions. These initial, coordinated attacks mercilessly targeted key positions held by the U.S. 1st Armored Division and elements of the U.S. 34th Infantry Division, catching them largely unprepared. The American response to these professional, well-executed assaults was, tragically, disastrous, revealing critical weaknesses in their readiness. Dispersed units, operating with poor intelligence and inadequate reconnaissance, coupled with a crippling lack of effective combined arms coordination, quickly devolved into chaos. American M3 Lee and M3 Grant medium tanks were fundamentally outclassed by the German Panzer IV AUSF. G, with its longer 7.5-centimeter gun. The terrifying new Tiger I heavy tanks possessed far superior firepower and impenetrable frontal armor. The Germans also made devastatingly effective use of their versatile 8.8-centimeter flak anti-aircraft guns in a direct anti-tank role, annihilating American armor from long ranges. At WWII, American armored forces, committed piecemeal and without proper support, were swiftly encircled and largely annihilated in the desperate run for the passes. Thousands of American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. A staggering amount of equipment, including approximately 100 tanks, dozens of artillery pieces, and hundreds of vehicles, was lost in the ensuing rout. The retreat was disorderly, bordering on a panicked flight, leaving the morale of the Green troops shattered and their confidence severely shaken. The relentless Axis spearheads, led by veteran Afrika Korps battle groups, pressed inexorably towards Kasserine Pass itself. This was the critical strategic gateway to Western Allied rear areas, including vital supply depots. On February 19th, German and Italian forces began their determined assault on Kasserine Pass, defended by a mixed, often ill-coordinated force of American and Free French units. The fighting within Kasserine Pass was brutal, chaotic, and often incredibly close quarters, a desperate struggle for survival and control. American artillery, despite initial disorganization and poor target acquisition, began to inflict significant casualties. However, they were frequently overwhelmed by the sheer speed and coordinated aggression of the German attack. The U.S. 1st Armored Division, though battered and depleted, fought valiantly in isolated pockets, demonstrating individual courage. Yet the overall tactical situation remained dire. Rommel's forces, including battle groups from the 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions, pressed relentlessly through the pass, achieving a critical breakthrough. They achieved a critical breakthrough, briefly threatening not only the crucial Allied supply bases at Tebessa, but also the strategic town of Thala. The situation was so desperate that British reinforcements, primarily elements of the British 6th Armored Division with their resilient Churchill infantry tanks, were hastily rushed to the front. Over the next few critical days, from February 20th to 22nd, Intense and bloody fighting raged across the Tunisian landscape as the Allies desperately tried to contain the German advance. British tanks and infantry, particularly the robust Churchill tanks, provided much-needed firepower and a significant morale boost, stiffening the wavering lines. American units, though reeling from initial defeats, began to show signs of learning from their costly mistakes. They demonstrated greater resolve and gradually improved tactical responses under intense pressure. However, Field Marshal Rommel's ambitious offensive soon began to lose its vital momentum, hampered by stiffening resistance. Facing ever-stiffening Allied resistance from reinforced British and American lines defending Thala and suffering from extended supply lines, Rommel's forces were stretched thin and becoming exhausted. Crucially, General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, commanding the 5th Panzer Army to the north, failed to provide anticipated support, leading to a critical lack of coordinated effort across the broader Axis front. On February 22nd, recognizing his strategic objectives were no longer achievable and fearing Allied counterattacks, Rommel reluctantly ordered a general withdrawal of his forces. By February 25th, the Axis forces had retreated back through the passes, largely returning to their original starting positions, ending the immediate threat. The immediate threat to Allied rear areas was averted, but at a tremendous and sobering cost in terms of lives and equipment. The Battle of Kasserine Pass stood as a stark, undeniable, and extraordinarily costly lesson for the nascent United States Army. American casualties were appalling, totaling nearly 6,500 killed, wounded, or captured. This was a devastating blow for a force just entering large-scale combat. Material losses were equally staggering. Approximately 183 million cubic meters, Lee and M4 Sherman tanks, 200 artillery pieces, and over 500 vital vehicles were destroyed or captured. The psychological impact of this crushing defeat was immense and reverberated throughout the entire Allied command structure, demanding swift action. General Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, swiftly and decisively recognized the profound systemic failures in leadership, training, and doctrine that had been so brutally exposed. The immediate aftermath saw a dramatic and uncompromising shakeup in Allied leadership, a direct response to the battlefield failures. Major General Fredendall was promptly relieved of command of 2 corps and sent home, his military career effectively ended by the defeat. He was replaced by the dynamic, demanding, and utterly relentless Major General George S. Patton, Jr., known for his aggressive style. Patton, renowned for his aggressive leadership, discipline, and keen tactical mind, immediately began to instill urgency and improve rigorous training regimens. He also streamlined fractured command structures. Crucially, Major General Omar Bradley, a highly capable and respected officer, was assigned as Patton's deputy. He would later take command of 2nd Corps himself, proving invaluable. His meticulous approach to logistics, sound tactical acumen, and genuine concern for troop welfare would prove absolutely invaluable in transforming the American forces. The lessons absorbed from Kasserine were profound. The critical need for experienced, decisive leadership at all levels, and the absolute necessity of seamless combined arms coordination. Other vital lessons included the importance of aggressive patrolling, robust intelligence, and continuous reconnaissance, along with the perilous dangers of dispersing forces without clear strategic objectives. The U.S. Army embarked upon a rapid, often painful, but ultimately rigorous process of self-correction, fundamentally reshaping its approach to warfare. Training protocols were overhauled, tactics refined. Officers demonstrating initiative and aggression were promoted, while those failing to meet new, higher standards were swiftly removed. The brutal, unforgiving experience at Kasserine laid the indispensable groundwork for the highly effective, professional, and ultimately victorious American fighting machine throughout the rest of the war. For Field Marshal Rommel, despite the tactical brilliance of his offensive, Kasserine Pass marked his last major offensive operation in North Africa. Although a clear tactical victory for the Axis in terms of casualties and captured equipment, it failed to achieve overarching strategic objectives of disrupting the Allied offensive. Rommel's forces were unable to exploit their breakthrough. Soon after, the strategic tide of the North African campaign would turn decisively and irrevocably against the Axis powers. Kasserine Pass stands as a grim but ultimately pivotal moment in American military history, a turning point that shaped its future. It was, undeniably, a humiliating and costly defeat. Yet, paradoxically, it was also the indispensable forge in which the modern U.S. Army was hammered into shape. It forced a raw, untested force to confront its deep-seated deficiencies with brutal honesty and to fundamentally transform itself under the immense pressure of combat. The painful and indelible lessons absorbed in the sun-baked Tunisian desert undoubtedly saved countless lives. Crucially, they paved the way for future Allied victories, from Sicily to Normandy. From the ashes of Kasserine, a new, far more resilient and exponentially more effective American army emerged, ready for the global conflict. The experience profoundly underscored that while industrial might supply tools of war, ultimate victory depended on competent leadership, rigorous training, and the hard-won ability to adapt and overcome. This principle applied under the most intense and unforgiving pressures of battle, shaping the future of military strategy and development. Kasserine Pass was a testament to the enduring principle that even in the darkest valleys of defeat, invaluable and transformative lessons can be learned, forging unimaginable strength from the fires of adversity. The unforgiving sands of Kasserine concealed not just the deep physical scars of battle, but also the profound, transformative seeds of self-correction and ultimate victory.